You stand in a room where the air itself seems to hold its breath. The scent of melted wax, crushed violets, and fear mingles in the flicker of candlelight. Before you, a bed dressed in crimson silk glows like an altar, and the eyes of courtiers glint in the shadows, waiting to witness what no one should ever see. History is a strange voyeur. Tonight, it watches too. Before we descend into this world of veiled rituals and political desire, take a moment to look around you. Thousands of you from every corner of the world, India, Brazil, Italy, the Philippines, Canada, are part of this unfolding mystery. Isn't it astonishing that across time zones and centuries, we're connected by curiosity for the same secret night? If you're ready to step behind the curtain of Renaissance power, leave a like, tell us where you're watching from, and let's begin. February 1502. The winter wind crawled over Ferrara's rooftops like a thief, sliding through every crack in the ducal palace. Inside, warmth fought a losing battle against the draft. Yet in one chamber, hung with heavy tapestries of gold thread and hunting scenes, the air trembled with anticipation. The Duke's household was awake, assembled not for war or council, but for something infinitely stranger, a wedding that would not end at the altar. Lucrezia Borgia, daughter of Pope Alexander Thecan VI, had arrived days earlier. Her entrance into Ferrara was a pageant of splendor, a parade of white horses, brocade banners, and musicians that played until their fingers bled. To the people in the streets, she was a vision. Blonde, serene, almost saint-like, but in the whispering corners of the court, her name was poison. "The Pope's daughter," they murmured, "the woman whose husbands died too quickly." Her dowry was a fortune, her reputation a curse. And yet, on this night she was expected to perform a miracle. She was to prove herself not only as a wife but as the key that would fuse two warring powers, the Borgias of Rome and the Estes of Ferrara, into one unbreakable alliance. In the candlelight stood Alfonso d'Este, her new husband. He was no idle nobleman. His hands bore the small scars of his trade. He cast cannon metal himself, the only prince in Italy to work his own forges. To his eyes, this union was less a romance than a test of strength. Yet as he watched his bride approach, something in the air shifted. She was not trembling. She met his gaze with the stillness of someone who had learned long ago to hide her fear. The witnesses gathered, nobles, clerics, physicians, each one sworn to observe the act that would decide the fate of their families. This was no perverse entertainment, it was legal necessity. The Church demanded proof that the marriage was consummated, for in an age of arranged unions and annulments bought with gold, legitimacy required spectacle. The bed stood beneath a carved canopy, its curtains drawn back. The air shimmered with heat from the torches. Somewhere beyond the doorway, a notary sharpened his quill. He would not enter until called, but he would record the hour, the testimony, and the result. When Lucrezia knelt before the priest to receive a final blessing, her veil quivered like a pale flame. "May this union bear fruit for the peace of Christendom," intoned the priest. But the words felt hollow. Everyone in the room knew the truth. This was no union for peace, only for survival. The moment the priest withdrew, the witnesses turned slightly away, as custom dictated, but not enough to lose sight of the bed. It was a ritual born of distrust, perfected over generations. In France, in Spain, in the duchies of Italy, noble beds had become stages where power itself was authenticated through the body. A strange silence settled. Outside, snow hissed against the stone. Inside, the rustle of fabric, the slow movement of candlelight over skin, the muted breath of expectation, all became instruments in a performance as ancient as it was obscene. Hours later, when the chamber doors opened, the notary stepped in, flanked by guards. Alfonso, bare-chested, stood with the calm of a man who understood that every gesture carried political weight. Lucrezia lay silent, her golden hair unbound, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The notary's eyes darted once, twice, then he nodded, inked his quill, and recorded the verdict. The marriage has been lawfully consummated. Outside, the bells of Ferrara began to toll. The city awoke to celebrate what it thought was a triumph of love. Only those who stood within the chamber knew how cold that victory felt. In the hours that followed, the witnesses dispersed into corridors smelling of wine and damp stone. Some spoke softly of what they had seen. Others swore never to mention it again. But already, rumors began to coil through the court like smoke. Had the Pope's daughter wept? Had the Duke hesitated? Did the priest truly bless the bed? One chronicler wrote, "They joined in body but not in trust." Another, more daring, noted that the Duke had returned before dawn to ensure the record could not be doubted. 3 times, some whispered, to silence gossip and cement alliance. 3 times to turn passion into treaty. History does not record the truth of that rumor, only that the marriage endured, and that its first night became legend. For centuries, it lingered in secret archives and half-burned letters, proof of how deeply the Renaissance blurred the line between ceremony and surveillance, between love and power. By the time dawn spilled over the frozen courtyards of Ferrara, the candles in that chamber had burned down to their silver sockets. The witnesses had gone. Only Lucrezia remained awake, her eyes fixed on the faint smoke curling toward the ceiling. In that fading light, she understood what the rest of the world would never know, that she had crossed the threshold not into marriage, but into a theater of endless watching. And beyond those velvet curtains, unseen yet omnipresent, history kept watching too. When the echoes of that February night faded, Lucrezia Borgia stepped out of the candlelight and into legend. History has never been kind to her. In the hands of gossip and propaganda, she became a ghost draped in sin, the venomous daughter of a corrupt pope, the sister of an assassin, the seductress who smiled while empires bled. But beneath the mask carved by rumor lay a far more disquieting truth. Lucrezia was neither victim nor villain. She was something rarer, a woman who learned to manipulate the very forces designed to destroy her. Her education in power began long before Ferrara. As a child in the Vatican Palace, she had watched her father, Pope Alexander VI, transform faith into policy, love into leverage. She grew up among marble corridors where the scent of incense could not mask the iron tang of ambition. Courtiers bowed, cardinals schemed, and behind every smile lurked a blade. Even as a young girl, she saw that holiness and corruption were twin reflections in the same polished mirror. In Rome, power was performed. The Pope's daughter was a prop in a theater that never slept. At banquets, Lucrezia's golden hair shimmered under the glow of chandeliers as poets praised her virtue, while diplomats whispered of her lovers. At 13, she was promised to a nobleman she had never met. At 15, she was wed. At 16, abandoned. Her first husband fled Rome under accusations of impotence, a humiliation engineered by her own family to annul the match. What does a young woman learn from being treated like currency? She learns to watch, to listen, to wait. Lucrezia began to understand that her silence could command more fear than her words. Every gesture, every downcast glance became a negotiation. She had discovered a weapon more subtle than poison, the power of perception. By her second marriage to Alfonso of Aragon, she understood the script by heart. The Vatican celebrated their union as proof of peace between Naples and Rome, but the marriage was doomed the moment her brother Cesare Borgia set his eyes on Aragonese lands. Alfonso was handsome, kind, and expendable. Lucrezia must have known his fate was sealed the night he was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's by masked men carrying papal weapons. He survived the first attempt. The second left him strangled in his bed, his body still warm when Lucrezia found him. Witnesses said she fainted. Others swore she knelt beside him, murmuring prayers over a corpse the church itself had condemned. Whatever the truth, that night forged her final transformation. She no longer believed in protection, only in adaptation. When the walls of Rome turned against her, she smiled and accepted her father's plan for yet another marriage, this time to Alfonso d'Este of Ferrara. But this time, she would not be the pawn. Ferrara was a new world, colder, more calculating, less forgiving. Isabella d'Este, Alfonso's sister, ruled the court with glittering intelligence and suspicion. A serpent in silk, one chronicler called her. She despised Lucrezia's Roman origins and waited for her to fail. But instead of confronting her enemies, Lucrezia dissolved into gentleness. She walked through the palace gardens in simple gowns. She hosted masses. She founded a convent. And slowly, impossibly, the city that had braced for scandal began to adore her. Beneath that serene surface, she built a network of influence invisible to her rivals. She negotiated dowries, managed estates, and used her letters, written in her delicate, flowing hand, to weave alliances across the peninsula. She charmed ambassadors, soothed old enemies, and turned her husband's loyalty into an armor none could pierce. Where others wielded swords, she wielded reputation. Visitors to Ferrara described her as radiant, charitable, holy. What they did not see was the precision of her performance. The girl who had once been traded like gold had now made herself untouchable. When accusations resurfaced, whispers that she still corresponded with Rome, or worse, with her brother Cesare, she offered only that soft, unassailable smile. "Let them speak," she told a confidant. "Words cannot stain marble." By the time Pope Alexander died and Cesare's empire crumbled, Lucrezia's power was secure. She had become duchess in more than name, managing Ferrara's treasury, arbitrating disputes, even overseeing the minting of new coin. Yet, even as she built her sanctuary, the specter of her past shadowed her. Rome could not forget the scandals it had invented, and the chroniclers of Europe preferred the myth of the temptress to the truth of the strategist. Still, there were moments when the mask slipped. Late letters to a trusted abbess reveal a trace of fatigue. "God sees all," she wrote once, "but he does not always speak." In those words, one can glimpse a woman who had learned to act as her own deity, to shape destiny with her hands, to create order where none existed. The court of Ferrara flourished under her quiet command. Music, poetry, diplomacy, all bore her signature touch. Yet every act of creation was shadowed by remembrance. The child who watched her father barter kingdoms, the widow who knelt by a murdered husband, the bride who was observed in her wedding bed, they all lived within her still. When travelers described her later years, they called her serene, devout, unworldly. They were wrong. She had simply learned what no man of her age could imagine, that power need not roar to rule. It could whisper, it could smile, it could wait. And when the bells of Ferrara tolled again, this time for her own funeral, the courtiers who once doubted her wept in genuine grief. They buried her beneath white lilies and marble, the same symbols of purity that had once been demanded of her. Yet even in death, her legend refused to rest. Because behind every prayer uttered in her name, there remained the echo of a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. Lucrezia Borgia had learned to play God, and history, blinded by its own judgment, never realized it was the one being played. When dawn broke over Ferrara, the frost still clung to the windows like breath on glass. Inside the ducal palace, the candles had guttered out, leaving trails of smoke that curled into the pale light of morning. The bed that had been the stage for an empire's hopes was cold now, but the air hummed with the residue of what had transpired. For those who had watched, the night was over. For history, it had only just begun. The notary's ink was barely dry when copies of his record began to circulate among the courts of Italy. "The union of Lucrezia Borgia and Alfonso d'Este has been lawfully and honorably sealed," the document declared. To the Este family, it was protection. To Rome, it was proof of obedience. To everyone else, from Florence to Milan, it was a signal that the Borgias still knew how to bend desire to diplomacy. Yet, power, once witnessed, cannot remain still. The spectacle that was meant to silence gossip ignited new rivalries. Isabella d'Este, Alfonso's brilliant and unrelenting sister, had been humiliated by the display. Her spies had reported every candle, every whisper, every sigh from that night, and what she heard enraged her. She wrote to a confidant, "The people call her saint, but I know her nature. Painted virtue hiding Roman venom." It was a declaration of war, not of swords, but of eyes and tongues. Across Europe, the ritual of the publicly witnessed consummation became legend. Ambassadors debated its meaning in candlelit halls. Was it proof of divine favor or the theater of moral decay? Some said it marked the final blurring of sacred and profane. Others that it was simply politics performed through flesh. But one truth persisted, that the gaze of witnesses had become as powerful as any army. In the Renaissance, to be seen was to exist. To be unseen was to perish. Lucrezia understood this better than anyone. The morning after that night, she emerged from her chamber in a gown of pale blue silk, her eyes steady, her composure unbroken. Courtiers bowed. Even Isabella, watching from the upper gallery, had to concede the woman's poise. The rumors that had followed Lucrezia from Rome, of poison rings, incest, and whispered murders, faltered before her serene presence. She had turned scandal into sacrament, but the cost of that transformation was silence. Every move she made from then on was watched, measured, interpreted. Letters she wrote to her father were intercepted. Visitors to Ferrara recorded how she smiled, what she wore, whether her husband still looked at her with affection. Even her prayers were not private. Chroniclers noted how long she lingered before the altar. She had become a living emblem, her body both the boundary and the battlefield of power. The alliance forged that night held, at least outwardly. Ferrara's fortunes rose. Rome extended its protection. The Borgias, though tarnished, maintained influence through Lucrezia's name. But beneath the glitter of diplomacy, the currents of envy and betrayal thickened. Alfonso's loyalty was steadfast, but his sister's spies never slept. Every feast became a test of civility. Every glance between Lucrezia and another man was recorded and reinterpreted as strategy or sin. It was in this atmosphere of watchfulness that Lucrezia began her quiet ascent. She learned how to guide her husband's policies with a suggestion disguised as modesty, how to soothe disputes before they erupted into bloodshed, how to make herself indispensable. The woman, once used as a tool of male ambition, had become a master of invisible governance. While men quarreled over armies, Lucrezia commanded the more enduring weapon, perception. And yet, the shadow of that first night never left her. Even in letters to her closest allies, she referred to the event obliquely, calling it the beginning of all eyes. Perhaps she meant the gaze of courtiers and chroniclers, or perhaps she meant something more eternal, the sense that from that night onward she lived beneath the unblinking stare of history itself. The idea of witnessed passion did not die with her. Across the courts of Europe, nobles began to adopt their own variations of the ritual. The presence of attendants at royal weddings, the requirement of physical tokens as proof of consummation, the clerical verification of heirs conceived under divine sanction. What began as an act of political necessity in Ferrara became a model for centuries of dynastic strategy. Behind every royal marriage henceforth lurked the ghost of that chamber, the notion that intimacy could be legislated, and love could serve the state. By the time Lucrezia Borgia died in 1519, the world she helped shape was already beginning to forget the woman and remember the myth. Chroniclers called her angelic, radiant, pure. None spoke of the rituals that defined her rise. The curtains of history, once held open, were drawn again, but behind them the machinery of spectacle endured. And still, in the archives of Ferrara, that record remains. Ink on parchment, declaring that on one winter night desire became evidence. It is brittle now, the handwriting faded, but its meaning still breathes. The act that was supposed to end in secrecy had become immortal. In the quiet of those halls, if one listens closely, the sound of quills scratching, the murmurs of witnesses, the slow rhythm of held breath, it all seems to echo. Because the legacy of that night was not just the union of two houses, but the birth of a new kind of power, the tyranny of the gaze. And somewhere in that darkness where the curtains never quite close, history still watches waiting for the next act.